Well, hello everybody. I hope I've got this down correctly. I don't know. For the first time, I will be announcing that we are broadcasting to you from 105.3 FM in Henderson Point, Mississippi. If I've got that correct, and I believe 107.9 FM in New Orleans, Louisiana. Of course, we had been broadcasting on 105.5 past Christian, but somebody decided to buy the radio station. So I'm hoping that that is correct and up to date, and if not, I'm sure the producer extraordinaire is going to throw it into my text window to let me know that I've got that frequency wrong. But if you're listening to us on it, then you've got the frequency correct. This is Voice of the People Radio on United Public Radio Network. You're listening to us live every Saturday from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I would like to welcome a guest that I have not had on the program before. It has been a short while with this electoral primary season since we've had an author on Voice of the People Radio, and I know first and foremost, of course, our guest is also going to want you to be tapping the keys, flipping around on the screen with your thumb and forefinger if that's how you're connecting to us, and checking out the books as well. I would like to welcome Dr. Dean Banks to Voice of the People Radio this afternoon.
Thank you for having me.
You know, it's really it's an interesting mix as always, Dr. Dean, when we have an author come on the program. And I know some of the authors have looked at it like almost as if it's a chore to do a radio program in order to promote something that they've spent probably on average 2 to 5 years, if not longer, working at.
Yeah, that's true. But I really enjoy the radio shows, especially when people call in and ask questions. I get some of the best questions ever, and also on the chat as well from people.
Sometimes we have questions that come up from previous shows. We've done multiple broadcasts at United Public Radio Network. Of course, we're formerly known as the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, so sometimes the studio number goes out to the live audience during a pre-recorded broadcast, and then somebody is listening to a podcast of all things and forgets that it's not live radio. So when we throw this out and say, if you'd like to talk with Dr. Dean on Voice of the People Radio at 504-273-7379, go ahead and call in. What happens is we then end up getting someone calling in, and they're expecting to talk to Giorgio Tsoukalos from Ancient Aliens. And so they end up live with you and I on the air. So I'm not saying I don't want anyone to call in tonight. I'm just saying hopefully no one does call in looking for Giorgio to ask him questions about his hairstyling.
Okay. So, well, I don't know anything about that.
His hairstyle from the television show has taken on a life of its own, courtesy of the internet. And so, folks, if you do want to take down the studio call-in number, it is 504-273-7379. And I guess, Dr. Dean, anyone who is listening to us that has a question for you as well, please do feel free to let them know where they can look you up online in case they have a question that they'd like to send you by email.
Okay. There's 2 sites that I have up. There's spiritualityguidance.com, where I feature the mainstream and some Facebook teachers in spirituality. We have videos, resource links. Again, that's spiritualityguidance.com. And then I also have a weekly online news magazine called the Spirituality Post. We've been coming out with our 59th issue tomorrow. And it's been going on for over a year, and we've had a pretty good response on it. And I get to feature some of the teachers on Facebook who I have come to meet over the past 8 years on there. And there's just some fascinating people there. I hear people all the time say to me, oh, well, you're on Facebook. You're wasting your time. People post their dinner. I said, you know what? Maybe that's your experience, but it's not mine. I have met some of the most brilliant, loving, kind, uplifting people on there, and I've currently, past week or so, reached my 5,000 friend limit, but I have some great friends on there, and I have other sites on there too that they go to, and I post every day because the whole idea for me for spirituality is if you get these messages, you get this talk from the still small voice of God within you, you really need to share it with other people. Doesn't mean that they have to believe it, because beliefs are different than knowing. To me, the intuition, the voice of the Spirit, is knowing, whereas beliefs are repeated thoughts that you accept as true. And most times people don't validate that. You should always, when somebody tells you something, test the veracity of it. Make sure that it is a factual observance, and then validate its occurrences. Because scientifically, you have to repeat an experiment, and it has to yield the same results in order to be considered the way it is to make a theory of it. And it's the same thing with human interaction. And most of us believe all the time this or that, but there's no basis in fact. It's just mainly emotionalizing. And I particularly remember when I first went to college and I went into logic, my professor, brilliant professor, he was incredible. And he got up and he said, what you're going to learn in this class, he said, you're going to do something that you've never done before in your life. He said, you're going to learn how to think. He said, it's going to hurt you. And he was right. You know, you have to, once you learn that most people don't think, they emotionally react to things, and then you learn how to think, how to break things down, how to see if what you observed is factual, and testing how many times it's been done, and it yields the same behavior. If you see that and you understand that, then you can integrate that as something into your being that you can believe what happens. But knowing what happens comes from going deep within yourself, and that's why I meditate. I've been meditating for 40 years. I learned TM when I was younger, and then I tried many different types of meditation. And the whole idea is to go deep within to the stillness, the silence, be peaceful, and just listen. And it's amazing what you hear. And of course, I have people telling me, oh, you're listening to Satan. The Satan's he's pulling tricks on you. And I'm like, how do you know that? Why? Because you live in fear? I choose not to live in fear. And, you know, an inspiration right now, you know, I want to say, you know, the passing to Muhammad Ali. He was a boxer. He said a lot of strange things. And, you know, he was always looking at himself, and people said he had a ton of ego. But in one particular clip I saw one time with him and Howard Cosell, they were going at it with each other, and then they thought the camera was off, and he leaned over and looked at the camera, and he goes, was I good enough, you know? And it was a big act, okay? But the man had a lot of energy, a lot of drive to do what he wanted to do, and I was fortunate enough to meet him one time in Hollywood when I lived in Los Angeles. I was in a movie called The Penitentiary, and I was one of the musicians in there playing in the band. And the premiere was on Hollywood Boulevard, and I was out getting some popcorn, and I hear this voice next to me goes, are those hot dogs beef or pork? And I'm looking, and I said, that voice sounds familiar. I turned around, there he was standing right next to me. And so, you know, I said hi and introduced myself. He was really nice, very nice to me. But his bodyguard had a huge guy behind him, you know, with a full head taller than Muhammad Ali. And, you know, he was looking around to make sure nobody was messing with the guy. But I only talked to him just for a minute, but he was very nice and very straightforward. You know, it's like the thing with Donald Trump that's going on right now. You know, everybody's looking at his persona, and everybody's saying he's egomaniacal, which I believe, and I'm saying not no, but I believe he is from watching him, okay? And I know other things about the man as well, from people that he didn't do great business with in Jersey. But I won't get into that. Just say to the fact that if someone talks continually referring to themselves, I classify that as a me consciousness. which gets back to the ego. And the ego is really a construct. It's not something real. It's a construct of your self-survival mechanism. Your ego's job is to protect you at all costs, okay? And that means a lot of people take it to the extremes of lying, cheating, stealing, doing whatever they can to protect themselves. The spirit doesn't need to do that. The spirit just unfolds divine love from the center of your being, from your heart. And it allows you to create and fulfill your divine purpose, which through the course of your life will be unfolded in divine order.
Dr. Dean, is it fair to say that the ego is only visible to the individual person?
You could say that. I think I've never heard it put that way, but I think you really could say that, because they've made up acronyms for it, what edging God out and all this other kind of stuff. And that's all cute and dandy, and it gets people to pay attention to it. But it all boils down to, for me, I divide it into three things for my spirituality: prayer, meditation, and service. Okay, and from that comes fulfillment. You know, I pray not to a anthropomorphic God in the sky, you know, throwing down lightning bolts or whatever, or, you know, being capricious. I pray to the center of my spirit within, which I believe is within everything everywhere. Okay, it's not pantheism; it's more like panentheism. And that spirit affects everything around me. We all live in this soup, and current astrophysicists have a lot of different theories, but basically let's boil it down to this. The entire universe, which I call the omniverse, because they refer to the universe as really being a multiverse. And I use the term omniverse because that incorporates all of these multiverses into being one thing. In the omniverse, there is about what they call 73% dark energy, which is an expelling force. It's something that's pushing away and pushing out everything from the Big Bang. And dark matter is like a scaffolding, okay, that holds and uses gravity to pull and congeal matter to create matter the way we see it. And that's only like 22%. And under 5% of everything in the universe is matter and energy. And matter is nothing more than energy moving at a slower rate. Einstein proved that. And it's more dense. And when matter, you know, gets excited with energy, it releases energy. Okay, so it's all connected. And we're in this soup, and we can't see these dark energies. And the only reason they're called dark is not because they're black. They call them dark because they don't know what they are. They can't figure out what they are. But they know they're there because of how matter acts. Okay, and it's like if you look at the results of things and see how they unfold, you can, sort of reverse engineer and go back and find out how they actually came about. And some of the current theories right now, string theory is one of them, which has got a lot of promise, but, there's people that poo-poo that as well. But basically they say there's 11 dimensions with how matter and energy unfolds. And they're finding out more and more the consciousness in itself directs that. All right, with the double slit experiment that they did, it depends upon where you observe electrons, whether they appear as particles or as waves. And it's all because of our consciousness affecting it. So what is consciousness? It could be two things. Your consciousness that comes out of you from your experiences, all right, is what's called an emergent consciousness. Every thought in your brain is a chemical interaction that creates further chemical interactions, electricity and magnetism. And that affects your body and your energy field, your aura, whatever you want to call it. And then there's a convergent consciousness, which comes from the spirit, as I call it, as a vague term, but it's something that's non-corporeal, put it that way. We are corporeal because we view and see things in a certain way. And that comes from our senses. We have 5 senses that input information. Okay, we need to realize that when we see something occurring, okay, we are experiencing a copy of that in our brains. We're not experiencing that thing particularly. We're experiencing a copy of it, and that's what we believe it to be. Our eyes see between, I think it's roughly 4 to 7 billion cycles per second, which is just 1 octave of frequencies. Our ears hear 7 octaves, between 20 to 20,000 hertz. And our other senses, the sense of smell and taste, are chemical responses, and touch, is the actual exchange of matter to matter. But they're all feeling energy somehow. They're feeling matter and energy, and they're converting that over to electrical impulses in our brain, and we begin to perceive what's going on in our environment. But before we actually put value to what we perceive, we filter it through our belief system, which has been programmed into our subconscious mind over the course of our lives to know, you don't put your finger on top of the oven, when the flame's on. If you did that accidentally once you got burned, you remember that. It gets programmed into you. You don't do it again, unless something's wrong with your brain, which some people are. But anyway, you are experiencing copies in your perception of what's going on in your world. And you can either react to that, or you can proact from it. And the difference to me is reaction is just emotional reactions. Somebody punches you in the face, and your reaction is you want to punch them back. Okay, that's a reaction. But a proaction would be to stop and go, well, why did this person do this? Do I need to move and get out of here and walk away and get away from them? It's doing something as a result of what has occurred that is positive, that takes you out of the negative, whereas reaction becomes that allows you to react to that negative, and usually it grows the negativity because of your reaction.
Yeah, it's just like multiplying a negative number by another negative number.
Right, you get a negative number, exactly. That's a very good analogy.
It's one of those things, I guess people, they sometimes are not consciously aware of the idea that what they are doing on the inside with the whole ego-driven process isn't always blatant and apparent to everyone else on the outside.
That's true.
And I really wouldn't know exactly how to classify that. I don't know if somebody would say that's kind of a psychological disorder. But I think that most of us probably exist in a state like that until we start to examine what we believe our consciousness to be.
Exactly. And, you throughout the course of your life, you have those choices. I know for me, I was raised in a Pentecostal church. Bible beating, everything in the Bible was correct as it stood. And, I got a cute little story I could share with your listeners, which I think they'll probably get a good chuckle out of. My dad always would sit me in the back of the church with him. And, he would watch the pastor and his wife, and the pastor was really good, but his wife had this firm grip on everybody in the church, especially the women. She made them come during the week to all these women's gatherings, and she would tell them, oh, you can't wear slacks, they're from the devil. You can't go bowling, that's of the devil. All this other stuff. And the women bought it because she was a preacher's wife. And I was watching this as a young person, and this was when we lived in Baltimore. I think I was about 8 or 9 or 10, something like that. And I'm watching this, and I'm like, something's not right here. It just didn't sit with me right. So my father used to show me Bible verses, and he showed me a couple of these verses I remembered. And every week at church, we had all the kids who were in Sunday school had to get up in front of the entire congregation and stand there and wait for the preacher's wife to put a word on the chalkboard. and we'd have to have a Bible verse that began with each one of those letters. And I can't even remember what the word was, but it was up on the board, and I didn't have one for the letter I had, but the guy next to me had one for that letter. So we switched when she wasn't looking. And it came to me, and my letter was I. And she was, that day, particular day, she was really riding herd on everybody. And she said to me, okay, Dean, she goes, I want you to give me a Bible verse that begins with the letter I. And it was, I said, okay, Proverbs 21:9. It is better to dwell in the corner of a housetop than with a brawling woman in a wide house. And with that, the entire church came down. They were laughing and like anything, and she turned beet red, okay, and turned around to me. She goes, how could you be so sacrilege? I want you to give me another verse right away. I mean, she was angry. And I said to her, okay, Proverbs 21:19. It is better to dwell in the wilderness than with an angry and contentious woman. And she took her Bible and threw it down to the ground. She was upset, and there's always that one scholar in the church that sits in the front row, and he's standing, he's going, but sister, here it is, it's right in the Bible, you know. In the meantime, my father's ducking down in the back, and my mother's hitting him in the leg because he showed me these verses. And this was to me was a result of a prayer that I had. I said, Lord, I got to do something to stop this woman. I don't know why, but that was my feeling, and it happened. She stormed out of the church, and you know what? Her husband, the pastor, was behind the pulpit, sitting down with his hand over his mouth because he was laughing too. But it turns out that the next week they had left the church. So sometimes you pray for things, okay, that you don't expect to happen, and they happen. You know, it's something worse happens. So they had to get another preacher in there, and I felt guilty over this for many years. But then I come to realize that, you know, it had taught me a very important lesson that when you try to use your ego to rule people and tell them how to live their lives, okay, that is what judgment is, really. There's a difference between judgment and discernment. Judgment is making an evaluation as to whether something would work for you or not. Whereas discernment is being able to look at a behavior or an action or whatever and say, oh, this is okay for them, but it's not okay for me. And people have to know the difference between that. And, you know, I've written about this a lot on Facebook. And I say this and I get people really angry at me, you know, because Jesus never said not to judge. He said that if you did judge, then you would be judged. That's what he said, if you take it literally. And when I was in seminary school, I had to go through and learn the original Aramaic and the Koine Greek and sit there and figure this out to know what it was and what they were actually saying. And by the time I got through, I was very amazed to the fact that what a lot of these preachers teach, you know, at Sunday school and their sermons are from a literal understanding of the King James Version mostly, where they didn't even take the geographical and cultural idioms of the time that this stuff was written into account. So they really don't understand what it meant. And I'll give you an example. If I say, Greg, if I say to you, it's in the bag, you know what that means, right?
I hope so.
Well, of course. All right, we know it's something that's going to happen. But if I put it into a box and buried it 6 feet down, and 1,000 years from now, somebody opens it up and goes, oh, in the box, new religion. I mean, they would start something that they didn't even know what the context of that phrase was. And that's what happened over the course of 2,000 years. And the Bible being called the Holy Word of God, okay, which is referred to as sola scriptura in the church, you know, that was a made-up concept, just like sola fide was. You know, that faith was more important than anything. And without delving too much into the Christian religion and the Bible, which I have studied a good part of my life, there's things that come to you when you look at behaviors of people that make common sense. That are just common sense. You don't do this, you don't do that. Okay? And you learn those things. And if something contradicts that, then you can do some further research and find out how other people handle it, because there's nothing like using people who have dealt with things you're going through. They become your role models. They become a way for you to understand how they dealt with it. It doesn't mean you have to deal with it the way they dealt with it, but if you can understand how they dealt with it. And if you go one step further back, you can go in and say, oh, okay, what were the emotions behind them doing that? And that allows to give you further insight into people's behavior and even your own behavior.
Yeah, I think what you're saying too, Dr. Dean, is that it comes down to whether, again, somebody's going to choose to be reactive or proactive.
Exactly. Everything, you ever notice how, and I'm sure you've gone through this yourself, Greg, is that you've done things and it didn't happen the way you want it to happen, okay? But then, a year later, you look back and you go, man, I'm glad it happened that way, okay? It unfolded that way for a particular purpose. You can't change it, so that's why we always say don't live in the past. But there are some theories out there. One of them is called the advanced wave theory, that things happen in our lives because they haven't happened yet. They're actually coming from the future back into our present, and we're reacting to them and making those steps in order to make that manifest destiny be true. Now, whether that theory is true or not, they haven't really proven it, but it's out there, and your brain actually deals with things. They've actually measured this now before they actually happen. A split second before they happen. And that's, I'm glad I mentioned that about the second thing. The most important thing in spirituality is realizing that in living from your spirituality, you're basically timeless. Okay? You look at everything that goes on around you as time, and it's moving, and it's now Friday, and yesterday was Thursday. Okay? You can see that and feel that. Okay? But time is a construct as well. We see things in the macro omniverse, as the moon goes around the planet, as we go around the sun, we see those things. But in the quantum level, it operates a little bit differently. Well, actually a lot differently. And from string theory, they say certain strings that vibrate in a certain way create quarks, and the quarks create subatomic particles, which congeal to make atoms, and then atoms come together, different atoms come together, and they make molecules, and then we see things as being real and solid because that is the only window that we have to experience them with our senses. Our senses are limited. They have limited ranges. They don't pick up everything, but there's also we have the five senses, but then there's the sixth sense, which is that of your mental proaction, your ability to stop reacting to things from the subconscious mind and learn how to take that information and say, okay, let me do it a different way this time. And if it doesn't work, then you log that in your subconscious mind and you say, okay, next time I'm going to do it differently. That's the process of learning in your mental state. But beyond that, the seventh sense in itself is that of the spiritual connection to everything. And scientists can't deal with that because it's beyond their capabilities. Science in itself is a belief system, and I know some scientists will be screaming at me, oh, no, it's not. We do, this is how we do it. We do the hypothetical deductive method, okay, and this is everything we do it this way. But again, that's all based on the senses. It's all based on a limited viewpoint of reality. What's important is to realize that there's something beyond what you see. There's the seen and the unseen. And the unseen is something you feel more than you sense with your other senses. You feel it intuitively. And you know when you're in the soup and you're floating around, like, Greg, you might be a carrot, I might be a potato in the soup. And we'll roll around as the heat gets turned up in the soup. We're rolling around, bumping into each other, and But the broth is what's keeping us floating around, all right? But we don't see the heat coming up, increasing the energy in the broth that moves us around, but we feel it. And it's the same way with the Spirit. The Spirit gives us intuitions, guidance. And hence that's when I came up with the Spirituality Guidance channel. You know, I want it to be there as a way to guide people, because I don't want to tell people how to think or how to feel. That's not my business. My job is to guide them and allow them to see that there are other things beyond what they see, and the best practice to get there is meditation. And as I said before, the three things I always go for is prayer, meditation, and service. To me, prayer is talking to God, whatever you want to believe God is, non-corporeal spirit or whatever. You don't petition. You ask. Okay, you ask for certain things, and right there, it's in your consciousness that you want those particular things, or you want to do something a certain way. Meditation is listening to God, is slowing down all the chaos around you, all the din of noise and racket, and going within yourself to a center of peace where you can actually hear the still small voice of God. And when you get that guidance within, you don't sit in your closet and don't do anything with it. You've got to go and take it out into the world, and that's what divine service is. You use the talents, skills, and abilities that you have been blessed with, and you share them with other people. You do things to help them, because in that process, not only are you helping them, you're helping yourself. My wife and I do this. I volunteer at a food bank. She volunteers taking care of feral cats in our neighborhood. We do what we can to contribute to our community, and we both write on Facebook, and we try to help people as much as we can, and it's very fulfilling. I've been doing this now for 8 years. Most of my life, I was a professional musician, a recording engineer, for both audio and video, and became a producer. I produced over 100 albums in the course of my career. I've been fortunate to work with some very well-known people in the business, and my experience is the more successful and the more incredible they were as an artist or an actor or whatever, actually the cooler they were, because they seem to understand this same principle. That you need to know what you want, that you need to listen to how to do it. See, most people get hung up in the how. That's not your job. If you put that energy out into the omniverse of the dark energy, dark matter and energy, and you put it out there, let it go. Don't try to control it. Don't try to manipulate, because that's ego. Ego tries to control and manipulate everything. If you let it go to Spirit, then Spirit will do it the best way possible for you. But the only way you can actually do that is to trust in the process. You need to trust the divine to unfold your divine purpose perfectly in divine order. A lot of posts I see on Facebook, I'm not perfect, and that's the thing I jump on right away. Because you know what? As long as you keep claiming you're not perfect, you're not. Okay? You're not. You're not going to be. You are a perfect spiritual being that is having what you can call an imperfect physical experience, if you want to call it that. But when you identify with ego, you identify with imperfection. But if you identify with Spirit, then you absolutely must identify with knowing what to do instead of believing what to do. And that's another term that some people have difficulty with. They say, how do you know? Well, when you spend time listening within, you come to know what to do, and you can actually use that as a benchmark against the thoughts that you have as to what you believe you should do. And you can bounce it off that knowing, and if something goes wrong in there as you're bouncing it off, you're going to be, okay, that's not going to work, because here is the acid test, and I will say that right now to everybody. If you do something that benefits you and other people at the same time, then it's of the Spirit. But if you do something only for yourself and your benefit that either harms or hurts or takes advantage of other people, that's ego. And if you look at our current state of politics and the politicians out there, everything's I. And during the whole Republican debate situation, everybody kept talking about what their record was, what they could do, but nobody talked about the issues. The only time I saw issues were arguments between Bernie and Hillary going on about what they should do. Okay, and I politically, I love Bernie. He's great, okay? But one thing I don't like about Bernie is everything is fight, fight, fight. And if you remember, Carl Gustav Jung said, what you resist persists. When you choose to fight, you are creating more of that. You are putting that energy out into the soup that creates more of it to come back, so you feel justified in behaving that way. We have to learn how to stop fighting things and start allowing things to be what they are without attaching any negative emotions to them. Because they will self-replicate, and you'll be creating the same thing over and over and over again until you learn how to deal with it.
You know, just to throw a little bit of humor in here, folks, you're listening to Voice of the People Radio on United Public Radio Network. I'm your host, Greg Miller. My guest this afternoon is Dr. Dean Banks. And Dr. Dean, I had this item picked up. This came to me, the week of May 18th, Tuesday of that week, May 17th. It was a newspaper article. Of course, it went viral on the internet. It's a Virginia woman is being spared having to vote for a candidate she didn't like in the 2016 presidential election because she's dead. Faced with the prospect of voting for either Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, Mary Ann Noland of Richmond chose instead to pass into the eternal love of God on Sunday, May 15th, 2016, at the age of 68. Her obituary, published in Tuesday's Richmond Times-Dispatch, read, and they, of course, commented, they said, Noland, you could say, was feeling the urn. So I guess there's a little sarcasm there on behalf of family members.
I don't know. I mean, that's funny. Funny in a just a general way, but I'm sorry for the family that they had to go through that. But I didn't even know when Barack Obama was in 2008. I really didn't know that much about him. I was, leaning more towards Hillary at that point because of her experience. And then when I did vote for him when he became president. And I voted for him again because, that man put up with more crap from the Republican Congress than I've ever seen any president do. And I don't care what they say. They can say whatever they want to. It's because there was a black man in the White House, okay? And you know what? They can deny it. They can twist it and try to spin it. Prejudice is something is so buried deeply within your subconscious that you don't even know sometimes that it's there. And I'll give you an example of this. My first experience when I was young, okay? I was born in 1954, and they did an experiment back in 1958. I lived in the state of Vermont, outside of Burlington, Vermont, and they started a preschool type of thing. And my my father was working for a dealership. He was a technical guy, the automotive engineer. And she allowed me to go to this preschool so I could interact with other kids. And I got into the preschool, and the first day, there was one black child in the preschool. All right? And I never had any interaction before. I was, 4 years old? And nobody was playing with him. He was off in the corner by himself. Nobody would play with him. So I looked over, and I wasn't taught prejudice. I didn't know what that was. 4 years old. I walked over, and I started playing with him. Do you know that those kids in that school the other white kids, would not talk to me. They didn't want to have anything to do with me. I came home that day, and my mom said, "What's wrong?" And I was crying. I was upset. I said, "They don't want to have anything to do with me." And I said, "Because I went over and played with the other boy over there." And my mom said to me, she goes, "I got one question for you." I said, "What's that?" She says, "Is he your friend?" And I said, "Yes, he is, Mom." And she said, "You don't let anybody tell you who your friends are." And this is 1958, mind you. In fact, my parents became friends with his parents. And you know what? None of the white people around us would bother with my parents anymore either. We experienced it from a different way than black people do, okay? Being white people, and you're constantly, how shall I put this? I have people say to me, "You know what I mean?" And I go, "No, what are you talking about?" You know, because somebody's black. And being white, I deal with that constantly. You know, people, you know, they just think that I should automatically agree with them without looking at the greater picture. And what I learned from being the greater picture actually in the preschool, what I learned from that was that, you know what, not only should nobody tell me who my friends are, but there's no difference between any one of us. We're all equal. Doesn't matter what we look like, you know, with color of our hair, skin, or whatever. All of that doesn't matter. We are living, breathing beings that are being expressed through a physical body. But we're all, what we are inside is all equal, and what we're all outside is equal, even though a lot of people take what's on the outside and use it to whip game on others. And for example, I'll digress a little bit into this. If you look at all the situations and problems that have occurred in the world, just look at the entire picture for the past, 4,000 years of history. It all comes down to who can control the flow of resources. Why are we fighting in Afghanistan? The same reasons the Russians were, because the greatest mineral resources in the entire world are in Afghanistan. They want to control the flow of it so they can make a profit off of it, whoever they are. The Middle East, oil. They want to keep oil flowing and cars and everything running on oil so that they can continue to make money. When we have the greatest source of energy from the sun that can be harnessed and used, that's free energy, like Nikola Tesla talked about, the free energy. And he showed that with his experiments with mechanical resonance, that there are other ways of utilizing physics to bring about the use of freer energy. He had one time broadcasted electrical energy over a 20-mile range and lit up a house. But you don't hear about that much because they don't want that, because they don't have the control that they want on it to be able to make the money. And the third thing is water. Water is necessary for all of life as we know it. So if you control water, you control oil, and you control the minerals, all right, then you can spoon feed them. And the analogy I'll give there is like computers. You used to get a 4 megabytes of RAM with a 20 megahertz computer, and you were like, wow, this was great when they first came out in the 90s, early 90s. But now, you get incredible computers, that are thousands of times faster. Your cell phone, for example, is 1,000 times faster than the computer they use to go to the moon. And with computers, they spoon feed you. They'll give you an 8-by CD-ROM, and then a 20-by, and then a DVD, and then they keep spoon feeding you stuff that they know they already have technologically, but they do it because they're making money after the sale time and time again. And this is another lesson I learned during the 60s. My dad, as I said, was an automotive engineer, and he worked on the Chrysler turbine car. And fortunately, we were in Baltimore. They had it at one of the facilities there, and he took me over and let me take a ride in it with him. And the car whirred. It had a turbine engine in it. And then after, of course, I think it was about 8 or 10 years they were doing research on it, they were going to try to put it into the market, but then the press release came out and said that They weren't going to do it because the government said that you couldn't use fossil fuels in it. You could use fossil fuels in it, but you could use alternative fuels. You could pour rubbing alcohol in there and the thing would run. All right? But the real reason that my father taught me about at that point, because he knew a lot of the dealers, the car, the engine, was so well built that it would last for 12 years without any major maintenance. But the fact of the matter is that dealers have a 6-year planned obsolescence formula. That wasn't going to work for them. They didn't want that car put out because they wouldn't be able to make money after the sale. So there's a lot of motivations that go on in life that people aren't aware of and they don't even think about. Or they think about it and they say, oh, well, I'm just one person, there's nothing I can do about it. And if you believe that, then you're absolutely right. But if you choose to be truthful and honest with other people and do what you can to help them, then you need to allow yourself to express that love from your heart to them, not constrict it in any way, shape, or form by imposing your agenda upon them.
Absolutely agreed. Dr. Dean, can you give everybody your website that they can go to, because we are about to hit our break here at the top of the hour on United Public Radio
They can
Network.
go to spiritualityguidance.com. That's where all of the spirituality teachers are and some resources, and then the spiritualitypost.com is the weekly online magazine where we feature different spiritual teachers from Facebook.
All right, and that Facebook, is there a group involved there that people can join on Facebook?
No, it's actually, you can go to my Facebook link is facebook.com/webproducer, WEBPRODUCER. That's my main page, and that's where I interact with all my friends there. And I have some great friends on there. They're spiritual teachers like Bobby Hinkle and Marie Corey, all people from all over the world. That's what I love about Facebook. You know, I would have never known these people in the course of my life unless I hooked up with them there, and we get to exchange. And to me, that's beautiful.
All right, stay tuned, everybody. You're listening live to the Voice of the People Radio on United Public Radio Network, coming to you from 105.3 FM in Henderson Point, Mississippi, and 107.9 FM in beautiful downtown New Orleans, Louisiana. Of course, take down this call-in number because you will want to call in during the second hour for Dr. Dean Banks on Voice of the People and all other UPRN shows. It's 504-273-7379, and of course you can always email the show at voiceofthepeopleradio@gmail.com. Dr. Dean Banks is my guest here on Voice of the People. Stay tuned. We'll be back with these words. After these words on United Public Radio Network. I seem to be a little conflict-driven there with myself, Dr. Dean. So we'll be back after these words, folks. Stay tuned. Don't miss the promos, and enjoy. And Dr. Dean, please do hang with us in the commercial break. We will be back on your radio, your computer screen, and in your podcast, actually much shorter than about that 8 minutes.
That man is just incredible. He's just so super talented and brilliant, and he would be a great guest on your show.
All right, I'll have to keep that in mind, and don't let me forget it, please.
I won't. I'll send you an email on it with a link to his stuff, and once you go to see, he's worked with every major recording artist from Motown during the 60s. Smokey Robinson's musical director, just worked with everybody, and he knows what he's doing, and he's got his metaphysical science doctor degree, and he also has a degree in music, and just a wealth of knowledge.
Okay, so we are back looking there. Dr. Dean, I guess if we've been on the air and hadn't known it yet, Folks, you're listening to Voice of the People Radio on United Public Radio Network from 105.3 Henderson Point in Mississippi on the FM band and 107.9 FM in beautiful downtown New Orleans, Louisiana. I'm your host, Greg Miller, with Voice of the People. This is the second hour. We come to you live every Saturday from 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Of course, the call-in number for the studio is 504-273-7379. So if you'd like to get in on the air with Dr. Dean Beggs or you have a comment for us, please do so. Take that number down also, because after Voice of the People, at the end of the 5 o'clock Central Time hour here, you'll have News on the Flip Side, co-hosted by Joe Montaldo from beautiful New Orleans, Louisiana, and Stephanie Benetti from New York City. So you don't want to miss the program there, because News on the Flip Side has what's going on in current events, and it's also very interesting, and sometimes I actually pop in there. So you never know when I'm going to show up. And Dr. Dean Banks, thanks for showing up here with us on Voice of the People live this afternoon.
Thank you, Greg. I appreciate it.
Now, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you to please go ahead and freely plug your books, because our online listening audience, of course, is worldwide, including the People's Republic of China. We are broadcast on public radio there for English listeners, so they are probably also hungry for content. And, of course, spirituality in People's Republic of China is not being looked upon with that same accusatory tone, that it has been since the great Mao Zedong, and people are really opening themselves up for more of the culture. And I really don't think that anything you've written is going to advocate the overthrow of
No, I don't think so. In fact, I wrote a book actually way back in 1984. It was called Communication, The Key to Successful Living, and never managed to get a publisher with it, so I went many years without writing. But I knew that after I turned 50 that I would be writing, and that's what I've been doing. I'm 62 now, so I've been writing for probably a good 8 years. But I had started online with Examiner.com. I live in Delaware, so I became the Wilmington Spirituality Examiner. And I was writing online, about 4 or 5 months, and this other writer came on. And this writer was an eschatologist, the believing of the end times. Everything in Revelation was literal. And he had this conservative Republican readership that was downright not very smart, and I don't want to cast judgment on it, but the things these people said to me in the articles that I wrote were downright ugly. All right, I called it the snake pit, venom in the snake pit. But I took all these articles that I wrote over the course of 6 months with them, and he started accusing me of this, that, and the other, and all of his readers sent stuff to the Examiner accusing me of putting him down, and I said to him, look, you want to debate, I'll debate with you. I have no problem. Because a lot of the stuff he said, he was really coming down on Ted Kennedy, Jimmy Carter, saying stuff that was just like totally untrue. So anyway, it came down to it. They ended up firing me, okay? Because, well, they fired me because he had, I was the top writer in Wilmington. I was getting more reads than anybody. And then he came along, and all of a sudden, he went way past me. Not way past, but, at least 1,000 more a week than me. So they figured, okay, he's, got more people reading him, and he's more popular now, so they fired me. And I did a little research, and I talked to a friend of mine, Kerry Martin, down in San Antonio, Texas, writer, a young writer. What a guy, man, just brilliant. And he did some research on it, and he found out that the Anschutz Group is the one that owns the Examiner.com. And they basically a Republican think tank. And what they were doing, they didn't want this liberal guy like me saying things about spirituality that contradicted the Bible, or as they call it, the Bible. And it just, they ended up firing me, and I sat there and I went, like we talked about in the first hour, something happens to you, you think, man, this is bad, but what am I going to do with it? I said, oh, well, I've got all these articles. Why don't I organize them into a format, put them together, and that's how the book came about. It's called Spiritual Growth, Articles of Expectation. And it has all the articles I wrote over the course of the time I was with the Examiner. And of course now they've taken down all my articles and I'm no longer associated with them. I'm persona non grata with Examiner, but I could care less. But the book came out, it's about a 450-page book, and I go through many different topics, from spirituality to politics, and how to look at things other than what they are, or what they appear to be, I should say. Like a lot of people come down on Joe Biden, okay? But Joe Biden here in the state of Delaware, there's nobody that's done more for people in this state. He is a kind, he's a tough guy, he's a fighter, but he's a kind guy who's done a lot to help people here. In fact, I know of a family that couldn't afford to pay their medical bills. And this was during the time his sons were in the hospital, and they were trembling going out to check out because they didn't know how they were going to pay it. And they were sharing the same room as him and his sons, or his sons, and he would visit. And he overheard them talking. They went down to pay the bill, and the bill was paid in full. Not with his name on it, but the only person that did it was Joe Biden, okay? That, if you're going to do something good for somebody, you don't need to get recognition for it, okay? You just do it because it's the right thing to do. And that's what, and I have some stories about him in there as well. And then also, one of the most interesting stories I feel is, I watch Rachel Maddow a lot, and she had this segment on about this guy who was helping to back the Ugandan legislation so that if somebody was gay in Uganda, they could put them to death. All right? Scott Lively, the man's name was. And I got onto an online debate with him, and I recorded it all. And he and I went back and forth for about an hour, and I took it, and it's one of the chapters in my book where I really challenge him. And he's an attorney, and he's a Bible scholar, but again, it's all based upon what's literally in the King James Version, not the meanings behind it, not an understanding of that whatsoever. Just, literally right out, this is what the Bible says. Well, you know what? It might say that, but do you know what that was translated from? It was translated, originally written in Aramaic, translated into Koine Greek, then translated into Latin, and then from Latin into English. And when you look at the original Aramaic, the Hebrew language was a very consonant-oriented language. They'd leave the vowels out because they wanted to keep the language secretive. But the Koine Greek is a very noun-oriented language. So, and the Aramaic was verbs, a lot more verbs than nouns. And when they translated it from Aramaic into Koine Greek, some of it was lost, the meaning of it, because there wasn't words in Greek that matched what was coming from the Aramaic. And the same happened when it went from Greek over into Latin, and then from Latin into English. So what I say to people, and I know they get mad at me sometimes, and that's fine if they want to, are you going to listen to the still small voice of God within you, or are you going to listen to what some sheep herders from 2,000 years ago wrote down? And a lot of them don't understand that when all these books of the Bible were put together, the Bible was actually put together by a murderer, Constantine. In the Council of Nicaea, when they put the books in the Bible they wanted that supported their position, and they leaned heavily on the Gospel of Paul, and all the Gospel, the letters, that Paul wrote. And I'm not a big fan of Paul whatsoever, because I believe, from my education and my understanding of him, he taught his own gospel and not the gospel of Yeshua, which they later changed to the name Jesus. But he had his own gospel. It was different. And the problems that we've had over the millennia with women not having rights, women being property, being chattel, with people of darker skin being treated less than people that are of white skin, slavery, all of that came out of Paul's letters. It was all there, and it was planted
No disrespect,
in their minds by preachers, especially the preachers who came along in the 1800s. After the Protestant Reformation, when Martin Luther put his 95 Theses on the Catholic Church and said, look, you know, he believed in sola fide, and he also believed in sola scriptura. And he also hated Jews. He wanted them to be rounded up and put to death, which almost happened 100 years ago. You know, when you allow beliefs to separate you, that's what beliefs do. Beliefs separate you. If you want to become unified as one people, you need to stop separating and start uniting. Okay? See that there's unity in diversity. That yes, we're all different and we might act differently than one another, but we all, you know, the 3 S's, we all have to do that every day. There's no difference between me and you and somebody else clear across the world. In fact, that message got hammered home to me after the first couple of years I was writing on Facebook. A young man from Pakistan. I didn't write one morning. I wasn't feeling very well that morning. And a young man from Pakistan wrote me on a private message, and he said, he called me revered sir, you know, and I tell him, please, I'm not a revered sir. I'm just a guy typing at a computer, okay? I'm putting stuff up there that I am experiencing from my meditation. And he said to me, I read you every morning before I go to work, and then when I get home I read you, and you didn't write something this morning. Are you okay? And I was just shocked that here's a person on the other side of this planet who got up every morning and looked for what I wrote. It was humbling. It was just, you know, I can't have words to describe it. And you never know who you reach. You never know who you get to, who you're helping. Of course, on the flip side, you know, I've had some pretty intense arguments with people on Facebook as well. And another reverend friend of mine, Reverend Bobby, he's always on me about, he says, you just love to argue. I said, well, you know, it's something I like to do, you know, because it's fun to me. But when it gets downright dirty and people are slurring people with terms, and another thing too is name calling. You know, it's, to me, name calling is a shorthand version of explaining what a person's doing. It's explaining who they are, their behavior is at that moment. It's not saying they are that, but it's a shorthand way of doing it. And you know, I don't think it's necessarily really a bad thing, but it's turned into a bad thing by people. And I know a lot of people won't agree with me on this, but you know, I'm not going to sit there and write 3 paragraphs describing why somebody is, you know, an a-hole, you know, when I can just say one word. And if they're giving me information about themselves that is contradicting, okay, what you can feel they're saying, then you know they're lying to you. They're not giving you the whole story. And the question becomes, do you want to spend your time arguing with this person or not? You know, and sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But I'm always fascinated with people's opinions, their beliefs, what they have to say, how they have to say it, because life is beautiful. Life is just a gift that's beyond anything. Because one day, and we just had a friend of ours, my brother-in-law's friend, who was a really good guy, and his family said he just passed away today. One day we're going to take that last breath, and we're not going to be in this body anymore. And people ask me, well, what is the soul? To me, the soul is the universal spirit of God that's within us, that is combining and interacting with this body. And that is what the soul is, so that when the body dies, the spirit is part of the entire soup of the universe, as it is. The energy cannot be created or destroyed. It's always there. But the body now begins to decompose and turn back into matter and eventually turn back into energy. Because every atom in your body has come from a supernova. All right? That's cooled over the years and congealed into who you are. So we're all connected. There's no separation. There's only apparent separation. And that occurs because when you observe something, you filter it through your belief system in order to protect yourself. Again, your ego's going, okay, I'm not going to stick my finger on the stove again because I'm going to get burned, okay? And then your perception is, I'm not going to do that. But your ultimate way you perceive life comes from your experiences filtered through your belief system. So if your beliefs are erroneous, and they don't necessarily reflect and show what is true, then your perceptions aren't going to be accurate. And this is why I say to people, when you observe something, make sure you observe the fact, you get information from what you have observed. I learned this from many of my science classes and stuff. You don't, when you're observing a flame burning, and you write down what the flame's doing, you don't talk about the technicality of it, you just observe it. And then you run it through your beliefs, and then you put it into your perceptions, and then all of a sudden you say, oh, that's a flame. Oh, well, I shouldn't touch it. Because if I do, I'm going to feel pain. There's a connection through everything, and it has to come into your perceptions. And we all perceive what I call the perceived dualistic reality. I got this term mainly from Wayne Dyer, who's one of my favorite teachers, and also Abraham Hicks. They have some wonderful things. But the perceived dualistic reality is everything that exists between the two extremes, which are hot, cold, black, white, dark, light. All of these extremes that exist are separations. But if you look at it on a wave is one wave, but it has a crest and a trough. It's not a complete wave unless it has a crest and a trough. It requires both sides to be able to be a wave. And everything that we experience in life are nothing but waves unfolding and either increasing in energy or decreasing in energy.
Dr. Dean, what do you think about the concept of artificial scarcity? And we were talking about artificial scarcity. We were talking a little earlier about the auto dealers and how they had a 6-year window, for cranking out the new models and getting all the leases and financing and payments and everything in order. And that turbine engine would last much longer, and it would just throw their whole...
Yeah.
Yeah, and
so you want me to elaborate on artificial scarcity?
I'd like to know what your opinion of it is. Just that everything, by a cabal of industrialists building in an obsolescence into something like a product like the automobile that basically ran our whole society for how many generations. But I think that we have a group of people in the world that are promoting the idea that somehow we have an artificial level of scarcity on the planet.
Well, let's look at this realistically, okay? And I say this all the time. I just said earlier about resources that
President Obama's Attorney General says she will not defend a provision in the law that
some people call the biggest
head of the
group of people,
scandal-starred
like
VA
6
medical
people on the Illuminati that run the world, and then the Bilderberger group that does, business throughout the world, and they're all controlling how everything is. That's fine. All that can exist. But the bottom line is, if you become the middleman between the resources that people need to live, okay, and them, you're going to make a profit. That's what it's all about. They want to make a profit. They don't care about us. If you notice, the only kids that go to war are poor kids whose families don't have enough to send them to college, okay? Mostly, anyway. You don't see the politicians' children going to war and losing limbs. My son wanted to go into the military. My youngest son, he's now 22, and he never went in But I kept on asking him why he wanted to do it, but he couldn't really answer me. And we had to visit a couple of vets who didn't have legs and arms, to see that this is what can happen. It's not a video game, I had explained to him. In a video game, an arm gets blown off, a leg gets blown off, and then you open up a box and there's a new one and you just stick it back on. That's not the way it is in life. Okay? Wars are created for them to make money. As Eisenhower talked about the military-industrial complex. Well, there's also other complexes. There's the pharmaceutical-medical complex. They feed each other so that people take drugs, prescription drugs, to take care of their illnesses. But in actuality, the only thing they do help in a lot of ways, but they also prolong the natural healing of the body. A doctor is supposed to be a guide to help you to get healed. And the body really does the healing. If you remove the negativity, whatever's causing the problem, psychologically, mentally, emotionally, you remove all of that stuff, then the body can open up its energy flow again, and you can become healed. But all of these, these companies and associations. Let's take, for example, this is going to be a tough subject, but let's talk about the NRA. The NRA was actually, when it first came around, was not a bad organization. It helped train people and get people together and talk about things, and they were a very calm, supporting organization until the lobbyist, Wayne LaPierre, took over with his cronies and started making it into an agenda machine. And he is paid by the arms manufacturers to do what he does. He's made a great living at it. And the only thing that he does really is generate fear, harp on the Second Amendment, which, by the way, if you read it and you see what it says about a militia. It doesn't say about anything about people having, an arsenal of weapons in their home. A well-regulated militia is what it talks about. But this man goes off and he says things to incite people, and people who do not know how to discern, people who judge, who might not have a lot of education, will emotionally react and listen to his lies and take it to be the truth. Just like the people, in my opinion, that are going after Donald Trump. They're following him. I know things about this man that if they knew them, they wouldn't ever want to even meet him. Okay? And I'm not going to sit here on your program and say negative things about him, but put it this way, that man does not deserve to be president of this country. He will cause more problems in the long run. All right? That's my opinion on it. But anyway, we all need to look at what people's motivations are. All right? And if you live in fear, right now, if you say you're living 30 miles away from the nearest cop, all right, and you're fearful that, anybody can come by your house and get you, then, if you want to feel comfortable and you train yourself and you're psychologically fit, then have a gun to protect yourself and stuff because, the cops can't get there. But if you live in an area where there are police, okay, and there is National Guard, okay, and there's all this, having a gun and accidentally discharging it could kill an innocent person. And if you don't have the proper training in how to use one, and you don't have the psychological makeup to be able to use one correctly, then you're going to have a problem. I believe in what the Second Amendment stands for, okay? But I think what Wayne LaPierre and his cronies have done to twist it and create and generate fear in people is wrong. And that's why Donald Trump is doing that now.
And I think what you just said about people going in and not having training and not having the makeup to use something like that correctly directly explains the epidemic level of shootings and deaths in Chicago this year. I mean, that's Memorial Day weekend. There were double-digit fatalities and triple-digit shootings. This is one American city. I mean, granted, it's now in the top 4 for population. I mean, and that is even more frightening.
Yes. Yeah, the inner city problems are, I lived in Baltimore when I was a kid, and it was peaceful, okay? Baltimore's a great town, and New Orleans, by the way, too. I'll say that right now, and I'm not trying to align myself with anybody's listening from New Orleans. I'm just saying it's a beautiful town. I was down there about 8 or 9 years ago doing video work for a company, and I got to go down to the 9th Ward, and I saw the devastation after Katrina. And I'll tell you what, people up here and in the rest of the country had no idea what the people in New Orleans went through. When I saw that, what it looked like and the devastation down there, I saw people living in FEMA trailers, literally years after it happened, and still not having their homes fixed. The way that situation was handled was, very unprofessional. Government has a place, and you'll hear from the right all the time that, we have to have small government. Well, you know what? If you don't have regulations, then, like the libertarians say, get rid of all the regulations. Let free market go. Well, the free market was doing so good. Then why did corporations take $93 billion in subsidies last year from the federal government? I'd like somebody to answer that question. Because if the fair market is not bringing the business in for them, then why are they getting all these subsidies from the government? Corporate welfare needs to stop, okay? We also need, in my opinion, to make it that if any congressman, representative, or senator takes money from any lobbyist or any corporation, that not only are they never allowed to serve there again, but they're fined heavily and they're put in jail. Because they are our representatives. They are not there to take money from somebody else and fulfill their agenda. And that's all lobbyists do. And that's why it's important for younger people that are listening to this, pay attention in school, pay attention to civics class, pay attention to social studies and history and English, and learn how people came together to get things done, but also how they drove each other apart. And that's why history is such an important subject, because you can learn what mistakes not to make again. And unfortunately, too many people don't pay attention to those subjects because they're not popular, or some friend doesn't care about them too much. We all need to help each other become better. If we don't, then we're fighting against each other, and nothing ever gets accomplished then.
Yeah, I think that thank you for that answer. I mean, using it as a perfect analogy, the whole idea of artificial scarcity, you wrapped it up for me as I was listening to you there. And Dr. Dean Banks is my guest here on Voice of the People Radio. When you said that, people were living there, in fact, Dr. Dean, as we passed the 10th anniversary this past summer in New Orleans from Hurricane Katrina, there were people who were still living in their homes on their property, and their homes had not been repaired.
Right.
Unscrupulous contractors had come in and ripped them off. The man that was, highlighted, I think it was ABC News, was living in his home with tarps over most of the roof, and every time it rained, I mean, he was basically running for cover. And that's a
shame in this country, the wealth in this country, and that happens, because there was, according to, the assessment of that, there was a lot of poor people down there. They don't really care about people who can't afford it, all right? They're going to have to figure it out on their own. And I'm sorry, there's Harry Connick and several other celebrities went down and built homes, and God bless those people. They did something, like I said earlier about like what Joe Biden did. They did something. They didn't go for the attention of it. They just went and did it because it was the right thing to do. That is what our government is supposed to do. Our government's supposed to do that. But here's what the problem is with the government. Over the past 30, 40 years, they have adopted a lot of business principles, okay? the governments have gotten hungry. They want a certain amount of people are they have the quota system. A certain amount of people are breaking the law. So if the cop is not getting 10 tickets a month, he's not doing his job. So they generate money for the system, and they keep the coffers filled. But that money is being put out into contracts of people that are in government that are already in the private sector working with somebody else. So in essence, what happens, and even if they're not connected at that point in time on the local and state level, then they'll send somebody in that becomes a congressman, like this guy Toomey up in Pennsylvania, Pat Toomey. He's a senator there. He was over, he actually lived over in China, and he supports Wall Street. He's been doing it all his years, and there's commercials on about it here, but I've researched him, and this is true, all right? This guy started out, lobbying, and then became a senator, and now everything he's learned being a senator, he's feeding back to the private sector. So when he stops being a senator, he's going to get a lucrative job at Wall Street because he knows how the system works. And what happens is when you're selfish and you only think about yourself and what your needs are and your family's needs are, you're going to follow a path that seems right to you, but then it's going to unfold eventually. All right? It's going to unfold, and it's going to wreak havoc on your life. We need to, in my opinion, again, is to, and that was, again, going back to the question you said earlier about my book, which I never really answered. The book is available on Amazon.com and also CreateSpace. Again, it's called Spiritual Growth, Articles of Expectation. Throughout the book, I get into, the various politics and religions and spirituality. And, you hear people saying a lot, well, I don't like to discuss politics and religion, or I especially don't talk politics. Excuse me, when you get in your car and you go down to the market and you buy your food, you're dealing with politics. Because every item in that store got there through a political avenue. You can't escape politics. It's part of your life. If you don't want to talk about it, that means you're obviously not interested in how things get to market. Like with GMOs, for example. Montaldo is trying to slip in the GMOs to everybody. Another thing years ago with the sucralose. All right, what is it? Splenda. It's got one molecule that's changed from sugar. All right, but it causes problems in your nervous system. Aspartame, NutraSweet, tears up your nerves. And the FDA let it through. All right, all because corporations control the flow of who's in the government and who makes the decisions. And they're trying to act like businesses, but the only problem is, and this is the main problem with government, is that it will never be like business because it employs government employees who know that every holiday they're going to have a day off. They have access to a federal credit union or a state credit union. You know what I mean? Their lives are set for them.
I think, Dr. Dean, you just hit a nail on the head with why a Donald Trump presidency would probably be massively dysfunctional, because this man would try to run the government as if it were a business, a corporate entity, and you just nailed what the government employees do. Their culture is not the same.
And you know what? They're great people. I'm not putting them down. What I'm saying is they do their job, but a lot of them do the absolute minimum, okay? And because they know they're vested. They're there, okay? And you made a good point there about, say Donald Trump does get in, which in my opinion, he's not, but, I'm not Nostradamus. I'm not sitting here predicting anything, okay? But if he does get in, he's not going to get anything done because he's got government employees to deal with. It's not going to work out for him good at all. He's going to have a lot of problems. But it's not to me. It's not going to even get to that point. like I said, I love Bernie, and I love what he does. I don't like the thing that he's fighting this and fighting that all the time, but he is bringing attention to a lot of issues, and I would love to see the man as president. But, you know, at this point, we'll know this Tuesday what's going to happen. But the one who does have the most experience, and let's be honest here, is Hillary. Okay, Hillary has. She's got a hell of a lot more than Trump. Okay, she's got slightly more than Bernie. But she is also tied to Wall Street and corporate money. All right. There's, you know, I liked Bill Clinton when he was in, and I used to, back in the 90s, watch Rush Limbaugh, his television show, where he would tear Clinton apart constantly every day. And Clinton did some nasty things too, like the bombing in Kosovo. Innocents were killed. There's no president is perfect, but I'll tell you what, I give a lot of credit to Barack Obama. The man has dealt with so much, and he tried to not say it was the race card when it was, okay? It was nothing, in my opinion, but race. People not wanting the black man in the White House. That was it. But if you notice something, he was our first black president, but technically he was half black, half white. You got me on this one, Greg? So you know what I'm saying? Some people were like, oh, well, he's half white, so I can vote for him. And I've heard this stuff, you know, and I hear this from people, and I'm like, you know, my God, you know, who raised you? You know, I'll tell you what, I've been, as I said earlier, I was in the music business for many years, and my teachers, especially my mentor, as I was telling you about, Tony Newton, who worked with Motown, that man taught me so much, okay? I don't consider myself a brother, you know, I mean, I'm just a person, but I'll tell you what, some of my best friends, okay, and I don't like using the term African American because we're all Americans, all right? It doesn't matter what color we are, okay? But he taught me so much and was such a significant influence in my life, all right? And then I had, my first wife was part black. And I had a guy come in one time, and he's in my house yelling the N-word here and there, and I turned around, walked up to him real calmly. I said, excuse me, you're insulting my wife. She's part black, and I'm asking you to leave my home. I don't want to hear that. Because to me, that is so backwards. It is so moronic. And he got all angry and yelling and screaming at me, and he walked out the door. But, you know, I can't stand listening to this negativity, but you have to in order to get through life. You have to learn how to channel it and handle it without attaching negative emotions to it. And it's not an easy thing to do, especially if you are set in your values. And that's really what the whole issue is. What do we value? The values are nothing more than beliefs that are shaped into a method of living, a process of living that pleases us and pleases other people, helps them and doesn't hurt them. And if we align ourselves with good values, then we can get through life helping others become what they should be. In fact, the one thing, and this comes up on Facebook a lot, you know, several teachers have said it, and it's been attributed to different teachers, but, you know, if you want something in your life, here's the one thing you got to do, is whatever it is, give it away to somebody else. If you give it away to somebody else and you help them, you have not only helped them, you've helped yourself, because you have aligned yourself with all that's good.
And Dr. Dean Banks, it has been a pleasure having you as my guest here on Voice of the People Radio this afternoon. It's the one thing I hate to say to all guests is we've run out of time this afternoon.
I know. We could go on for a long time, Greg. It was a pleasure meeting you. You're a great host. You know, I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you and your listening audience.
Well, we will have to do this again. Of course, folks, you can do this again next Saturday, 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. Eastern Time. You're listening to Voice of the People Radio on United Public Radio Network. I'm your host, Greg Miller. Without is no Voice of the People Radio. Please keep that in mind as you stay tuned for News on the Flip Side, co-hosted by Joe Montaldo in beautiful New Orleans, Louisiana, and Stephanie Benetti live in New York City, coming up to you live with News on the Flip Side. Thank you for listening, and have a great night, everybody.